Valerie Greene is a master transformational life coach, an emotional freedom technique practitioner, and a certified neurolinguistic programming master practitioner. Gosh, and has trained in so many more valuable techniques. There's literally just a few. I could spend our entire time here just listing them. But I'll say that yoga, hypnosis, somatic healing, integrated nutrition play a role in the work that Valerie offers. With over a decade of experience, she specializes in helping women and couples transform conflicts into deeper intimacy and connection. Valerie's unique approach combines emotional healing modalities with practical communication tools, guiding clients to reignite passion and foster lasting love. Her programs, such as the 12-week Manifest Lasting Love, have empowered thousands to create fulfilling relationships. Valerie's work emphasizes the importance of self-awareness, empathy, and authentic communication in cultivating meaningful connections. There's a lot there. Thank you so much for joining again. It's very kind of you to come back. I think the first thing I do have to ask you is just to take you back a little bit, if that's okay, just to your formative years. I wondered if the 16-year-old Valerie would recognize the person you've become today.
That's such a great question. And thank you, Andrew. I think it was interesting to have my training reflected back to me. I mean, I think the trainings that influence the work that I do now are more emotionally focused therapy and the Relationship Coaching Institute, and also the Gottman couples work and the Hakomi work. You know, I really combine a lot of somatic approaches to help couples transform conflict into intimacy and heal singles blocks to intimacy so they can attract the right partner for them. And so I feel like that's just my passion. And so I think if I was to ask the 16-year-old version of me, what do you think of me now? Or, how do you feel about what I'm doing now? Or whether she would recognize me, I think she would feel in awe. And what I mean by that is that in my it's funny, I think it was when I was in high school, I was clarifying this with my dad. My dad and I had a very fraught relationship. I always could feel his positive intention and his desire to help me, but he was very emotionally wounded and probably on the spectrum. Would have been very expensive for him to get tested, but everyone always thought he had Asperger's. He kind of showed up, and I understand that it's just part of being on the spectrum now, but that he was not really able to be emotionally available, although he pretended to be when I was little. So I felt betrayed when I realized that he couldn't. And then he got kind of mean and authoritarian and controlling, but I could always feel his desire to help, but it was in a way that made me feel unseen because all we did was argue and butt heads, and he would just escalate and force his will. But I could always feel the positive intention. So I was extremely confused as a teenager. And because I was only taught confrontational language from him, my relationships with my friends were very fraught, because it would be kind of like I would have a lot of fun with my friends, but then we would argue, and I would always feel like relationships were a struggle. And I always would try. It really set me up with this insatiable desire even at a young age. But I didn't know in high school how to do it, because I was a typical kid where I'm, pulled in all these different directions. And I had a lot of friends in high school, but I always felt insecure. I wasn't sure why the kids that were bullying me in elementary school were nice to me now. I wasn't sure why I was friends with the, because I was in all like the smart classes. So I would eat lunch with them, but then I was friends with the punk rock kids from the radio station and like the ravers. And, I had a couple of really close girlfriends where we would hang out on Friday nights and drive around and, pick up boys and take them to the diner, So I had a lot of fun as a teenager, but I always felt insecure. I was like, why do people like me? Why don't they like me? Why do they like me sometimes and not others? Why do the people who I want to like me not like me? How can I make the people like me who, you know what I mean? Like, it was just, I had all these questions, and I remember even telling my dad, I'm like, you know what? Because he was very empowering. He always wanted me to do well in school, and he would help me with my homework. And, he was, I want to really represent him correctly. He was very supportive in many ways. So I remember telling him, and he was really into Tony Robbins and Wayne Dyer and personal growth, so it was more like when I had an emotion and I would bring it to him and I needed support, he'd be like, don't think like that, think like this instead, then you'll feel better. Like, it was like that kind of support, which obviously I then took into my adult relationships, and that didn't go so well. um but we can get there in a bit. But anyway, I remember telling him when I was around 16, you know what? I realized that I can achieve any goal in life. Like, anything I put my attention on, I can actually succeed in, except relationships. Those are hard. I don't have control over that. I don't know what makes it work. I feel really confused about it. And he said, me too. And so, like, now that I think back on it, I feel a lot of compassion and empathy for him, because I wasn't able to see at the time, because I was a kid, how much he was struggling too, and how he always felt. I mean, he said so when I was a kid, but obviously kids don't fully grok what their parents mean until they're adults, So he would struggle, and he would say things like, "People don't like me, and why don't people like me?" And I don't know how to make friends, and I'm just not a people person, and I don't understand them too. Why are people so irrational? Why aren't they just logical all the time?
You haven't mentioned your mum. Was your mum around?
Yeah, and she still is. My dad passed a couple years ago, but my mom is still around, and she's more spiritual. She's not emotionally available either, but she's very caring as well. Both of my parents are very caring, and she's an extremely open-hearted, caring person. She is just very spiritual, and so it would be more like, don't feel that way, believe this, because that's what God says, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, also very helpful in a certain way. I think having a spiritual practice is paramount, at least for me, to be able to, because my connection with my husband, since he's a human being, right? He can't always show up in a loving way for me. Nobody can, right? He might be dealing with his own stuff that day. Not that he's mean to me, but sometimes I need support or compassion or empathy, and he's not available for that. Like, so I can meditate and pray and do my spiritual practice. And what I teach in that regard is that love is not something that we create. It's something that we open up to receive, from whatever higher power we believe in during whatever spiritual practice we can do. So I'm also grateful to my mom for modeling that for me. But I didn't grow up with any awareness of emotions other than when I was like 0 to 2. My dad used the parenting books and taught me how to feel my feelings. And then afterwards, I didn't get more support in that. Then we were just arguing. But it was like, I even actually in my spiritual practice today, and this is part of what I do with my clients when I do healing work, is I'm connecting with my inner 2-year-old, and she was feeling her feelings, and I'm feeling my feelings, and I'm learning how to come out of being dissociated and feel my feelings more fully, which in and of itself is hard because you don't know what you're not feeling, So it's like, I feel my feelings probably more than most people do, but like, that's not what I need in order to heal my body, because I'm also healing from injuries right now. So it's like I need a greater degree of emotional awareness and physical sensation awareness for myself to heal. So I connect with my inner 2-year-old in my meditations, and feel that I'm getting wisdom from her in my body, and she's getting, attunement from me, and it's like all of the programming that it's not safe to feel my feelings can kind of fall away as I do more of my own healing work. So it's a very intuitive process that I also help my clients with if they have inner child parts that need to be integrated and healed, or if they have dissociation and they don't know how to feel their emotions. A lot of times, that's the key to developing more intimacy in a romantic relationship, is our relationship with ourself. So that's also what I help my clients to do, is to connect with their own feelings, their own needs, their own body sensations, their own intuition, to learn how to attune to themselves and to feel happy and fulfilled within themselves. Because if we're not, then we project that onto others and usually blame others and start arguments with others, which is what My dad did, but he didn't know he was doing that, so I have a lot of compassion and forgiveness, because I also help people forgive, and it's a lot easier to forgive when I know that they were doing their best. It's harder when you think
Yeah.
someone had malicious intention. That goes a lot deeper, but I do help people do that deeper forgiveness work too, just because um, when we're holding on to resentment, obviously it just hurts us, but that doesn't mean that what happened to us is okay. So it's a complicated process, but it's like the more somebody feels self love and self acceptance, the more they're going to be able to be present and loving and accepting of others, and no, so in terms of like how I help singles overcome their blocks to intimacy, a lot of times we are attracted to people who are at a similar level of consciousness to us. So like if I'm not aware of my own feelings, I'm not going to be aware that the person I'm on a date with is just orienting towards let's have a great time and not feel our feelings. I'm not going to notice. I'm just going to have fun and fantasize and fall in love and not notice that they're emotionally unavailable if I'm not emotionally available to myself.
And do you think it's a societal, cultural, religious element that sort of almost stopped us creating that self-love, self-awareness, understanding of ourselves? Because I don't remember ever being taught at school to understand myself, or to ever having a practice where I was very aware of my own feelings. People always talk about it's important to be nice to other people, but we're not often taught it's important to be nice to yourself. So do you think that's a societal conditioning that we haven't had until we really think about it? We haven't actually thought about what do we need and what's important to us in relationships and emotions and those sort of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could do a deep dive on that. I want to make sure I don't talk too much about that because I have a lot of thoughts. But but they're all theories, right? Because we don't know
Yeah.
how it developed that people, lost their connection to their feelings and to their own bodies. I think the Industrial Revolution has a lot to do with it. I think people were a lot more in touch with their bodies when we did more physical labor and we were out in
Mm.
nature.
Mm.
Because you can't be out in nature and not feel your intuition. If you're living in nature, you have to be present in your body. You have to feel all your senses. Your intuition lets you know when there's something that's either really helpful or really harmful that's coming near you. And therefore, you're going to be more aware of your emotions. So I'm not saying I think we should all go back to living in nature. Our society is way past that, although a lot of people do. And I think it's wonderful to the extent that we want to. And in fact, obviously, we need to be more in harmony with nature itself in order to be sustainable. In whatever way we can recognize that as helpful. But I think that we can't rely on, and we could never rely on school to get us in touch with our feelings, because that was never the purpose of school. The purpose of school, as it was invented, was always to make people better workers.
Yes.
And so that was never the intention of school. It was actually always assumed that it would be the parents and the family system that would teach kids emotional awareness. And in fact, when we had before the nuclear family, so I think it broke down a lot with the nuclear family. Before that, we had multi-generational homes. And I'm not necessarily saying we need to go back to that either, because it's very complicated, people's lives right now. People live in different cities or countries than their parents. And, it's now we have different value systems a lot of times than our parents. And it's a lot more complicated than it used to be. But I would say pre-World War II, and I'm not saying things should go back to then either, right? We're just answering what changed in terms of people's ability to stay present with themselves. I think when we had multi-generational homes, a lot of times, and you'll see this sometimes in other cultures where the parents are working and the grandparents actually raise the kids, and the grandparents can be more present with the kids because they have more time. And then the kids get more presence and they get more attunement. And then the parents are obviously also there parenting when they have time, but the other relatives fill in the gaps. and then they get more support and more attunement and more presence than they would just if there's only two parents, and especially if they're both working. It's not like I said with my parents, it's not their fault that they couldn't be emotionally aware because of their upbringing.
Mm.
I know my parents' childhood and that they didn't get a support in being emotionally aware in their own childhoods either.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you can't give what you don't have. So I think it's the same with the nuclear family. I think with the nuclear family, it's just there's too much pressure on parents to be all things to all people nowadays. The world's just getting more complicated, and they don't necessarily have the time or the presence to give the emotional attunement to the child. And so if we're assuming that, okay, who's supposed to teach us to be connected to ourselves is not institutions, because that's not their purpose. Their purpose is their own survival. And the school system is the purpose is to prepare people for work, not relationships. That was always the purpose. The system that was supposed to prepare people for relationships was always the family. But there's been a breakdown in society in the amount of time that parents have for their kids. And that's, not the parents' fault necessarily. And if the parents, you're only relying on these two people, if they didn't get the support they needed emotionally to do that, they're not going to be able to teach their kids,
Mm-hmm.
So it's like when we lived in tribes, I'm not saying we should go back to living on tribes, but the kids get the emotional attunement and the example from all these different people. Whereas now it usually just falls on two or one.
Well, one of the challenges now, and we talked about it a little bit before we hit record, is that with the sort of mass advent of technology, in particular smartphones, social media, etc., there's almost a very, very extended, not family, but extended space where children, younger children, are connecting. And it's not filtered, it's not edited, it's this sort of almost fire hose of noise that's coming out people. And I do think something. I've got teenage children. It must be so much harder now. So yes, both parents are at work and you don't have that availability, but they have this always on device that I'll see. Parents give their sort of 2-year-old a pusher, a smartphone to look at while they're on their phone or they have an iPad or whatever. And I'm not critiquing anybody's parenting style, but it does feel that we're allowing influences into our children's lives at younger ages without necessarily being fully aware of what those influences are.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Totally. I know. I wonder about that all the time. When I see a parent giving a toddler in a stroller a little tablet
Yeah.
to play with so that they're occupied, that then they're not aware of their surroundings going through the world, and I wonder about the implications of that too. I always strive as a relationship coach to not have a judgmental mindset. So because I don't know, right? And that's one of the first things that I teach my clients is like only believe what you know to be true, especially about other people. Because if we make a judgmental story in our head about other people, then that creates tension in my body as I do that. And so if I know something to be true, then I ask myself, is that my responsibility to do something to change it or not? So it's like if I see somebody on the street giving their child a tablet, I feel sad
Yes.
because I am referencing my own childhood and I know what it provided for me. I know I said my mom was not emotionally available, but she spent like all of her time with me when I was a little girl, and she's an artist and we made art together. We would like all of it, sculptures and play with Play-Doh, and she made dolls and we'd play with them, and like we'd paint paintings. And so it's like I got so much. I feel like part of my sense of awe and curiosity and self-discovery and inherent zest for life comes from my connection and interactions with her. And so what I'm imagining is that kid in the stroller with the tablet is being deprived of that. But I don't know. Maybe this is the only time the mom has given the kid that. Maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So maybe they normally have a good relationship, right? I mean, so that's my point. I can't create a story in my head.
Mm-hmm.
But if I do know that that's how the kid's being raised, and that they're not able to interact with the parents. First of all, I don't create this ruminating, judgmental story in my head about the parent, because that would also create tension in my body and prevent me from being open hearted in general. Right. And then I would project that onto the rest of my day. So I'm going to send compassion to her and be curious. What might be the reasons why someone would do that? Oh my God, she's really struggling.
Yeah.
She's not able to be present because of X, Y, and Z reason. You know, but at the same time, that's a cop out if I'm not also asking myself, is it my responsibility to do something about it, or is it someone else's? Right. So if this is someone I know, then I'll want to talk to them about it. But then it is, I'm a relationship coach and I give my friends advice all the time when they ask for it too. It's not because I don't only work with romantic relationships. I work with just all people that want to have better relationships with themselves and others. Although obviously most of my clients come to me for their romantic relationships. That's what matters the most to them to get support with. But the way we do one thing is the way we do everything. So if it's my friend who has a child and they're giving the child a tablet, um, I would need to attune to her, meet her where she's at, see how I can influence her, see how I can communicate, not in a judgmental way. So I need to not be judging her. I need to be, here's the positive intention why I think you're doing this. You're so busy. You don't have time. You're really stressed out. You know, what do you think is the impact of the tablet on the child? What do you think that is the impact on their development? I'm just going to be curious, see what she knows, see what
Mm-hmm.
she thinks about it, see how she feels about it. If she wants to learn how to parent in a better way, then I'll support her with that. Because, like, believe it or not, it's actually kind of ironic. I'm not a parent, but I wind up coaching a lot of parents too. I don't really market to that niche because I don't really feel like I'm an authority, but I've read all of the Adele Faber books, how to talk so little kids listen. And I think those principles are like how to talk so anybody listens and listens to anybody talks. It's just primary. I mean, are you familiar with those books?
Yes, no, absolutely. And the thing I think that concerns me, and I was thinking about this yesterday, is that when you just triggered me by saying that when you were with your mum, you painted and did clay and did Play-Doh. I love the smell of Play-Doh, and created, made things. So when I was young, I absolutely, and for less so now, just because of various reasons, I was obsessed with reading. I try and read a book every day from the school library, and I could open a book and literally within a few words, I could be in the middle of a city in America, having never been there. I could be on the furthest planet in the galaxy. I could be underwater. I could be anywhere. The imagination, I could fill the imagination with the visuals, everything about it.
Uh-huh.
And
Me too, by the way. But anyway, yes.
and I think about when my children, who are 18 and 16 now, were younger. We go out for a walk. We're fortunate to live near some woods and forests and things, and they would have 3, 4, 5 hours of imaginative fun with a stick and two stones. The stick would be a wand and a horse and a rocket ship and an arrow and a bow. It would be everything. They would create this whole world and whole narrative and whole story around these inanimate objects that they found. I think my concern now is that we're almost taking away the need to imagine, because we with a screen that shows you the story, that plays the music, that has the characters, whatever. You don't need to imagine what they look like. You don't need to imagine how it sounds. You don't need to imagine the stick as a rocket ship or whatever. You've you've
Mhm.
been you've been given so much information, and I just wonder whether we'll find in the workplace, in life, in relationships, whether we will find in the next 10, 20, 50 years that actually our ability to imagine and create has been diminished because we've been given so much.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a real, um how should I put it, risk in that. I think, however, it's been going on, it's just increased now. But I mean, I'm Gen X. In my generation, I encountered a lot of peers as a kid that watched TV for like 4 or 5 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I think it has the same impact. Um, and it's one thing, my parents, I think they did a lot of things well. They limited my screen time as a kid. And I used to take out like 20 books a week from the library and have my
Mm.
mom read them to me and then read them. And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm so creative and imaginative as well. Um, and um, so yeah, I mean, and I'll keep bringing it back to work I do with couples, because that's what I love talking about, or how I help my clients. Um, is that so? People of my generation, I'm 47, a lot of times have the same impact where they feel that because they were raised with television and they didn't read a lot of books, or their imagination wasn't encouraged, that they don't know what they want, they don't know how they feel.
Yeah.
They've been trained to just be productive and to see themselves as, I'm worthy for what I do, not just for who I am, and I don't even know how I feel. And so I think that phenomenon has been going on, for um, a long time, for the factors that we've explored, and probably others. And so it takes practice. And I think the research on neuroplasticity is really important, because all these skills can be learned. The brain is adaptive. We
Yeah.
can learn how to feel our feelings if we haven't learned when we were younger. And
Mm.
there's so many tools that can help us. And when I was first learning to um, feel my feelings, I would actually set alarms throughout the day to remind me to check in with my feelings. And I learned nonviolent communication, and I put a list of feelings and needs on my phone, and I would scroll through the list because they weren't top of mind. I got a list of body sensations, and I would ask myself, like, is that feeling tight? Is that feeling heavy? Am I feeling pressure? Where am I feeling it? Is there a color and shape to it? And I would slowly start to get more of an awareness. And as I got more of an awareness, then I started being able to transform my own, because my problems, stemming from the fact that I only learned confrontational language as a kid, were that I would either sweep conflict under the rug in my 20s, or it would just kind of reach a threshold where I wouldn't have another way to be besides argumentative, because that's all I learned with my dad. And then I would just start arguing. And then, of course, we would be caught in our negative cycle, and then inevitably wash, rinse, repeat with all my relationships with my 20s. It would start out passionate, and then we would get really contentious, and we'd be sleeping in separate beds, and it would feel horrible. And then we break up, and it was like, that caused me to say, how am I the common denominator? What can I do about it? And so throughout my 20s, I was learning these emotional healing tools, and it all had to do with, how can I share my own feelings and needs versus criticize and make him wrong and be judgmental, which is, the latter was what I learned. And the more that I learned how to say, hey, I know you didn't mean it that way, and my feelings are hurt, and can we talk about it so that maybe we could do it better next time? It's like, I need to have a solution focused approach where I'm not making him wrong. But when I learned how to speak that way, then eventually, my relationship with my ex-husband was actually the most influential with that, because we're still friends. And that was when I really, like, every time we were arguing, I would take a time out and I would go look at a sheet of feelings and needs, and then come back and do do-overs. And that's when I really learned, like, how to come from feelings and needs. And it's what caused him to write an endorsement on my website, that, like, I always really care, because I really did always care about having a harmonious relationship with him. And after a couple of years of that, we decided, and we worked with coaches and therapists ourselves, that we wanted different things. And that's why we agreed together that we work better as friends. And now I'm happily married to my husband now, who I've been with for over 10 years. And so we also share this rich, deep emotional, um, deep emotional connection, and deep emotional intimacy. And we're both very highly sensitive people, and we can attune to each other very deeply, but we're also very sensitive and get triggered easily. So we set up our relationship as a healing partnership from the beginning, because we
Mhm.
knew that it would, when you're with somebody and you're romantically attracted to them, they're going to bring up all of your wounds to be healed too. We noticed that from the beginning. And, I'm a healer myself. So I was like, okay, I'm happy to um, co-create a life with you, and it's going to bring up all of my triggers. So I want to set up our parameters for how we're going to help each other heal too. And so, that's also a big part of our connection. But, I think that it's important for when I work with singles, I help them look at what's the culture that you want to create and how do you start to talk about that with somebody once you become exclusive to see if you want the same culture. Like, how do you make decisions and how do you connect and what are the ways in which you want to prioritize connection and how do you develop secure attachment? What are the skills that you need and how do you really attend to each other's feelings and needs and how do you do that in an interdependent way rather than a codependent way? We explore all that. um, so I think that in order to heal from this paradigm that we're talking about where we're not encouraged to be emotionally connected and imaginative, we need to be intentional about learning how to feel our own feelings and needs, and then also what culture are we creating to share that with another person? Like, that needs to be agreed on ahead of time, and how do you talk about that, and so that's the questions that I help my clients answer, because otherwise
Mm.
we wind up just kind of like falling in love and assuming that the other person wants the same thing that we do without talking about it.
I was gonna ask you about high achieving self-aware women in particular, because I think there's, and I'm sometimes I'm not sure that the narrative "you can have it all" is necessarily that helpful. So I think a lot of my friends will come to me and say, "Oh gosh, I'm struggling with my partner. I can't find a partner," right? And they somehow, if they're not incredibly successful in their personal life, they feel that they failed somehow because they've been told you can / should have it all: successful career, successful relationships, successful parenting, successful friendships, or whatever. And I wonder how do you guide women in particular that come to you and either feel they aren't attracting emotionally available partners, or somehow that they're not as successful in their personal life as they've been able to be in their professional life.
Hmm. Yeah, and I really want to normalize that too, because as a culture, the way that we've been exploring, we're really guided by our whole culture to focus on our career first.
Yes.
And, there's no point in looking to settle down. You shouldn't try to find somebody to marry until you have a successful career. I think those are the guidance that a lot of young people receive, especially, it actually was when I was growing up. And I'm imagining that it still is. So I want to normalize that. It's definitely not uncommon because that's what we were encouraged to do. And there is something to be said for the fact that the brain doesn't finish developing until 25 and we really need time to get to know ourselves. Um, but I think that if we're shooting on ourselves, um, as I like to call it, that means that
Favorite word that we all have. Yeah.
yeah. It means we're taking on other people's beliefs as opposed to looking at what's authentic for us, which never really works out. So the question that I always ask high achieving women is, why do you want a romantic partnership? It's not just because you're told that you should have it all, right?
Mm.
Um, if that's the only reason why, I help them work through their limiting beliefs and, realize they don't really want it. But I would say that applies to an extremely small percentage of the population. But the key shift that needs to happen in order for people to attract people that are emotionally available is, as I said before, that we're emotionally available to ourselves. So if we're looking at it intellectually, I want this because I should have it all, then we're not feeling our own longing for it. And feeling our own longing for it and our own loneliness and our own desire to co-create and to build a life with somebody is a deep emotional longing. And unless we're really in touch with that, then we're not able to intuit what kind of culture do I want to create in my ideal relationship? What does it really mean to have secure attachment? What does it really mean to be a safe haven and a secure base? I think the secure base piece is really important for high achievers. So the thing is that it's important to separate what we want from what we need. Um, so having it all is not actually what anybody wants. That's overwhelming. um, what everyone wants is what makes me tick and what would be most supportive to me and what are my values and what values do I want to share with my life partner. Am I more committed to serving others or am I more committed to comfort? Am I more committed to achieving financial success so I can be a benefactor and serve people um, in that way, or am I more committed to being a healer or a therapist and serving people that way, and money is not that important to me and I can live a more modest lifestyle. It really depends on what are the values and the lifestyle and the culture that I want to create. And then in terms of secure attachment, what it means to be a secure base is that I'm aware of what makes the other person tick and I'm supporting their goals and dreams. And if they fail, then I'll encourage them, and I check in regularly about how those goals and dreams are going. And the safe haven aspect is if you're struggling emotionally, I want to give you support to come back to a place of center. And I want you to do that for me too. And we know how to be with each other's feelings and needs and be on the same team when even during conflict, that I trust that I can work through it with you and feel connected even as we resolve our differences. Right. And it's like, so if that's a culture you want to create, what skills do you need to have in order to attract someone like that? What questions do you need to ask? Not on date one, but on date one, you can ask things like, what are your beliefs about love? And that's a really great way to tell if the person even wants what you want, because they'll really open up then. So, but then on dates 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, what questions do you ask to tell if they share that culture with you? How do you really know how they respond to an unpleasant feeling? And if it's the way that you would feel supported, how do you test that in a way that it isn't setting you up to be hurt and making it feel like an interrogation? You know what I mean? Like there's just all of these questions that I help my clients navigate in order to really slow down and tell if the person wants the culture that you want. And I find that with a lot of high achieving people, they're more in their masculine energy,
Yes.
meaning masculine energy is um it's beautiful. The world runs a lot on masculine energy, right? It's not um having a gender to it. Masculine and feminine energy is shared by both genders or all
Mhm.
genders, I want to say, because I don't, obviously in today's day and age there's more than two, but it's not dependent on gender. Um they're energies that everyone has inside of them. So masculine energy is just goal oriented, focused on going in a particular direction and achieving an outcome and navigating resistance and staying focused and analyzing and solving problems and providing. And that's wonderful. I want that in a husband. I want all those qualities, because I'm more feminine. And it's up to everyone to figure out what energies are authentic for them to embody. I have to use my masculine energy to communicate a point right now. So it's not like I'm purely feminine, right? Um, but so feminine energy is more receiving and feeling and intuiting and the practice of really adorning the body with wisdom and moving in a way that's pleasurable and enjoying the moment and having fun rather than being goal oriented. And so obviously we need both, right?
Mm.
Like to everybody needs both to be balanced. And so I find that high achieving women tend to look at relationships from a more masculine energy lens where how can I meet somebody? How can I find somebody? How can I check the boxes? How can I get what I want out of it? And not in a selfish way,
Mm.
but just in a more goal oriented way. And so it's a different way of being where it's about enjoying the process of discovery and about learning who the other person is and slowing down and feeling my feelings and my intuition in the process and thinking about how I feel with this person rather than how do I make them like me, or do I like where they're going in their life? Are they aligned with where I want to go? Is a more masculine energy question, which, is also important. But
Yeah.
how do I feel when I'm with them? Can they honor my feelings? Do they share my values? Do they really have compassion and empathy and care in their personality? Do I feel emotionally safe with them? Those are questions that are really important to ask when we're dating somebody that high achieving people tend to not ask themselves, which is why they wind up in relationships with people that are emotionally unavailable because they don't know how to tell if they are before they get attached.
Mm. Do you think that obviously a lot of people nowadays meet their partner through an app or online or whatever, and I sometimes wonder whether and I've never used one, but I assume on the apps you can filter by age, by job, by I don't know, by beliefs or by body type, by whatever. I sometimes wonder whether those filters, there's over filtering naturally leads to a much smaller pool of potential partners, and you would assume if they all tick those filters, they're pretty much going to be the same type of person. And I sometimes wonder whether if we use those apps or the people you're talking about have a particular focus on what particular things, whether we just limit ourselves to a certain type of person, and we're not open to actually exploring what might be the right person for us, if such a phrase is correct. I wonder, what are your thoughts on dating apps and how we meet people these days?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I do think that there's a risk in that if we make the search so narrow that we are, let's say, focused on someone with a particular education level, and maybe we would really connect in the real world with somebody who might have not the education level they want, but maybe they're successful or intelligent in a different way that surprises you, that you thought would only come with someone who has a master's degree, let's say, you know. Um, and so I agree with you in that. Um, I think online dating has a lot of pitfalls. The advantages, though, are that you get to meet a pool of people that you wouldn't meet in real life because, like,
Yeah.
people, it's really hard to meet people in person nowadays, depending on where you live in the world. I'm in the New York City area. So
Mhm.
with my clients that are also in New York City, I encourage them to meet people more in person because not like in a bar, but the point is that in person in New York, there's a lot of activities that you can find with people that share your values
Yes.
because values are what makes long-term
Yeah.
compatibility, not necessarily shared interests. So in New York City, it's really easy to go to a meetup and meet people that share your values. In fact, that's where I met my husband, is through the authentic relating community, because it's all people that share my values. um, but but if you're looking to meet people in person, then you don't know if they're single or in your compatible age range.
Mm.
So I look at online dating. If you live in an area where you can meet people in person, I look at online dating as a supplement to expose
Mhm.
yourself to more people, depending on what your timeline is. Like if you're
Mm.
a woman in her 30s who wants kids and you have a timeline, then I suggest both in person and apps, just to be able to expose yourself to a wide enough pool. Um, but if you're looking on apps, I agree that there's a lot of pitfalls, meaning um, on apps, a lot of people tell you what they think you want to hear, and they also don't necessarily share about their values. They share what's fun. They try to put their best foot forward. Their pictures might not really accurately represent them. Like there's a lot of pitfalls,
Yeah.
and so when I coach my clients on meeting people on apps, I kind of help them learn to read between the lines to be able to tell people what their values are just by what they wrote. And if they don't write a lot, that in and of itself is might be a red flag. But it
Yeah.
also might not, because people are used to getting a lot of contact without writing a lot. So it's like we've sort of become lazy, and I don't fault people for that. So what I do is I get my clients to start to ask deeper questions, even on the apps. Even if all someone's doing is sharing a picture, you want to see if they can have a deep conversation just from that picture, as opposed to saying, I like your picture, which is, a superficial thing to say. It's like, and obviously to be playful about it, but like, wow, I noticed that you were hiking on this particular mountain and I've always wanted to hike that
Mhm.
particular mountain. What was your experience at the summit? Was it hard to climb to the top? What was challenging about it? What was easy about it? Was it fun? Like, ask deeper questions
Yeah.
and see how they engage you. If they engage you in kind and they share about what it was like and they share, a moment from their hike that lets you know that they're present, then all of a sudden you're in a conversation. But um, the flip side to that is people can tend to spend too much time texting and then build text relationships. And we really want to avoid that. Yeah,
Yeah.
because then you don't really, the compatibility can only be assessed in real time. And it's a real danger to build long distance relationships where you don't see each other, and you haven't met yet. It's like I encourage people to meet as soon as
Mhm.
possible. So what I recommend is start a deep conversation over text if it's going well. If you can actually speak about deep things, then say something like, I'm really enjoying getting to know you, and texting is so one dimensional. A phone
Mhm.
call would feel much more connecting. What do you think? And to transition there, and then from a phone call, transition to meeting as soon as possible. And
Yeah.
that's how you can really tell if they're wanting to pursue something more serious, as if they want to get off the app and meet. And then, of course, when you're meeting them, I suggest meeting someone from an app for like an hour coffee date, because you don't know them. Like if you meet someone in person, you already kind of gauge the chemistry. You've already sort of, if you meet them through friends or through a meetup of shared values, like if you meet them at like a meditation event, let's say, that like, okay, I can have dinner with this person and it's likely to go well. But you're meeting a stranger from an app. I recommend like an hour coffee date just to gauge, a sanity check. um,
Well, yeah, and do they look? You hold a phone up. Gosh, this photo was like 20 years ago.
no,
It's
no,
actually, yeah.
exactly.
Are you actually the person you purport to be? Really? So, but once couples are in a relationship, things obviously go well. Some things go, but often we have. I know you've sort of talked about. I thought it was really interesting finding the real source of conflict. So people come to you and they aren't getting on, or something's gone wrong, and I wonder how often people come to you and they talk about something as being the issue, but actually you know that that isn't the issue. The real issue is something quite different. And I wonder how hard it is to get to the real source of conflict that couples might have.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's actually, I mean, it's hard for them, but it's not hard for me. That's why they come to me.
Yeah, I guess.
Um, because they don't actually see it. They think that they're fighting about, I don't know. Let's say they're fighting about one person's relationship with their parent.
Mhm.
Like you talk to your mom on the phone every day, and you're like, you shouldn't be doing that, and
Yeah.
you're a mama's boy, and like I don't try, whatever.
Mhm.
And that's common. um there's also fights about the dishes or parenting or cleanliness in general, or the amount of time that they can spend with each other. um those are the most common ones that I encounter. But regardless, it's not actually about criticizing what the in that particular example, it's not about criticizing the relationship with his mom. It's about the woman not feeling like she's a priority. And she's not talking about that. She's talking about criticizing what he's doing with his mom. She's not talking about her feelings and needs. Um, and that's an attachment need to be prioritized.
Mhm.
And so I teach needs versus strategies. That's what makes us not needy. one strategy is to say you can't talk to your mom. That's not healthy either.
No, it's not
There's many
solution.
different strategies where she could be prioritized, but first we need to legitimize the need and talk about why that's important. So I do psychoeducation on secure attachment, such that people really get what it takes to have a healthy relationship and what it takes to prioritize each other. But that doesn't mean that he can't be close with his mom. It just means that he needs to have healthy boundaries with her. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And what are his beliefs about that? And, what does he want versus what does he think he should be doing? And then what does he want with his wife? And what does it mean for him to prioritize her? And does he want that too? And does she want that too? And what does she mean by that? And what does that look like for her? And what does he want that to look like? And how does he want to be prioritized by her? And what are the behaviors that they would both do and not do in order for them to be prioritized? And how would that make them feel? And what would that provide for them and for their relationship? And, really help them to set up guidelines and test it out. And how do they speak about it in a way that they feel like they're on the same team rather than that they're arguing? Because maybe the way that the wife criticizes the husband in that example causes him to feel less close to her and then not want to change anything. Maybe he's digging his heels in. Maybe if she speaks about it in a more vulnerable way, then he'd be more motivated to prioritize her more. But then that might be scary for her because maybe she learned that vulnerability isn't safe, so then it's about helping to reframe it so that they know how to talk in a way that feels safe for both of them. And so it's not just about teaching communication skills, but it's about helping them learn how to speak in a different way and practice that with me, and then talk about how that feels for them, and really practice speaking about their feelings and needs with me so that they get used to it, and then they can take those skills home with them. And because the primary tenet of secure attachment is that you always know how to, no matter what happens, that you can relate to it like you're on the same team. Like you're not against each other. You can both look at, okay, this isn't working for me, let's solve it together, not this isn't working for me, it's your fault.
And how important do you think physical intimacy is in a relationship? And I guess the question I'm really asking is, in a relationship, as people get older, have been together for a certain amount of time, perhaps one party's desire for physical intimacy is lower than the other party, perhaps feels like an obligation. I think a lot of that maybe is to do with how, and you mentioned this before about being very goal oriented or task focused, that we've sort of defined, society has defined intimacy, defined sex as penetration, basically. And we sort of forget that actually intimacy in sex can be holding, cuddling, looking, stroking, massaging, all those things. But there's almost that thing, well, no, it's if we don't have sex, then we've not been intimate. And I wonder how you help couples that really might want to really stay together and be a strong couple, but there is that distinction that they feel about the levels of intimacy that they experience with one another.
Yeah, and that's also a really good question. And I think that there's a number of factors, meaning even when people's desires haven't changed, I think that it's hard for people to talk about sex in the first place. And people have a lot of shame about talking about it. And if couples don't know how to talk about it,
Yeah.
then in the first place, then when people's desires inevitably ebb and flow and change circumstantially, I know that, for example, neither me nor my husband has an easy time getting turned on when we're stressed out. And that we need to create space to drop in. But if we don't talk about that and we don't realize it, it'll just kind of get pushed by the wayside. And I know that happens for a lot of couples, as for legitimate reasons, they don't have time to think about, because a lot of times what people need to be turned on, it's a stereotype. And I think one that can be true for people in their early 20s, that it's just easy to get turned on because our bodies are developing and our hormones are raging and we're discovering ourselves. But that's also a generalization. A lot of people have a hard time getting turned on for various reasons throughout their life. But I would say that for a lot of people, they don't need to talk about it in their 20s because they're just discovering themselves. But for a lot of people, they do need to talk about it as they're discovering themselves. And a lot of people inherit a lot of shame around their sexuality that prevents them from being able to talk about it. So the first thing I do when I work with couples and sex is an issue is I help them remove the shame about talking about it. We look at their beliefs and where do they come from, and is that true? And what's the evidence that it's true? And what's the evidence that it's okay to talk about sex? And, like, how can it be okay? And how can you give yourself permission for it to be okay? And that can be a very emotional process for people. And then people have shame about their bodies. And their bodies changing, even if their libido doesn't change. A lot of times women's libido will change not just because of menopause, although that's a huge factor, but because as their bodies change, they judge their bodies more, and then they can't get turned on because they don't feel lovable, which is a lot to work through. And I have a lot of compassion for that. And I help my clients with whatever self-love issues they have and self-acceptance issues they have. And that doesn't necessarily even have to be about their bodies changing. It could be shame about their body and being naked or about sex in the first place. So it's a big part of what I talk about is I help clients to normalize talking about it and to clear shame about talking about it. And so then, of course, your question about is sex just penetration is another belief, right? I feel like it is incredibly highly individual. Some people have that belief. So is another belief, right? Yeah. Made it work when one couple has a sexual issue from the beginning. Other ways that they feel that they can help each other achieve orgasm without penetration, or without traditional penetration. Certainly, couples of different genders have to look at that issue in a creative way as well. So I think that our culture is normalizing that sex can look a lot of different ways. So especially younger people are more comfortable with that way of looking at it than perhaps older generations have been. But it's the older generations that are aging and having libidos shift the most dramatically, right? And so when I do work with couples where that's happening, a lot of times I actually really like, I don't know if you're familiar with the approach of David Snarch and the passionate marriage.
No.
I really like his paradigm because it's about personal growth. It's about really looking to have that I can tolerate inside myself the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions that I have about my husband changing. That I'm not so codependent that I need him to stay the same in order for me to feel okay, and I can increase my bandwidth and my tolerance for discomfort, because change is inherently uncomfortable and that intimacy is inherently uncertain. And I need to be comfortable with certainty, in order to be comfortable with like having conversations about sex change.
I guess the challenge often is that if you haven't, and a lot of couples don't speak about this for 20 years, and suddenly having a comment, or almost, and this sounds terrible, I can almost imagine couples, individuals picking an argument just before they go to bed to avoid. And if I'm I'm sort of mid-50s now, my erections aren't the same as they were when I was 20, for goodness sake. If I was going to say, I'm not going to get erections, I might want to sort of pick a fight about the dishes or the dog or the window cleaner or whatever, just to avoid actually that coming up as a topic. So I do completely empathize with people that haven't had that discussion. And also, I think a lot of it comes back to our teenage years, where we naturally are never taught about the importance of having a self-pleasure and a self-appreciation practice, in a way. So if we don't know what we want at that age, and we just sort of fall into having sex, and we have sex and we enjoy it and it feels lovely and it's great, all that great stuff, but if we've never really thought about what we actually want, need, desire, and enjoy, it's then quite hard when you're 50 to sort of sit down and say, right, let's have a conversation about it then. It's I think
Yeah.
that's where it's so valuable to come to you and people that have a similar understanding to you, to just get somebody to sort of almost help create the safe space for the conversation, because none of
Yeah.
us want to be judged by our partners. None of our partners would. None of us want to be, not wouldn't be laughed at or ridiculed or mocked or denied. Or none of us want to feel, oh my goodness, I'm going to say this, or that I want to try this, or I don't like this anymore, or I can't do this, and then our partner's going to recoil from us. None of us want that. So but sometimes when it's just the two of you, it's hard to have that safe space. And what will happen is we'll tend to blurt something out in the middle of a disappointing sexual experience, which is the worst time to sort of say something. I've always hated it when you do that. It's like,
Oh
what?
my God.
I've been doing it for 20 years, and I've always hated it when you kiss my ear or lick the back of my leg or whatever. It's like, it's literally the worst time to say it. But
Right, right.
it builds up and builds up and builds up, and then suddenly the emotions explode, and you're in a terrible place then. So I do think having a conversation in the space, in the presence of a professional, is such a worthwhile investment for future happiness, for sure.
No, no, absolutely. And I work with both individuals and couples with that. If I'm working with just a woman, let's say, who
Mhm.
has never asked herself, or maybe she used to know herself in her 20s, 30s, 40s, what turned her on, but now that doesn't work anymore and she doesn't know how to experiment, then I do help her experiment with self pleasuring and what helps her turn on, and develop a journal to record insights. And I do talk to people about that. And yes, when I work with couples, a lot of times it does help me to have this objective third party who's normalizing the conversation, and that it's okay to talk about, and that it's okay to have your desires change,
Yes.
and that it's okay to not know. Because a lot of us weren't taught how to know. And it's okay to want different things, and you can always find a way to have both if you're creative about it. I actually really like, in the book Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson, she has a whole chapter about sex where couples have a conversation about sex, and they even talk about, well, I forget the term she uses, but she has such wonderful terms, like look at it as like you're seeing it on a movie screen. I don't remember the term is, where you're scripting it out. Like, let's say it doesn't go the way you want. How would we handle that? What's an example of like how it would go really, just one example, like not that you're
Yeah.
creating this, but like how would it go really bad, and how would you navigate that to still have both of your needs met anyway? So it's like you kind of write that out, and like, how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to handle it in a fun way if the guy can't get an erection? How are we going to handle it in a fun way if the woman feels pain when in penetration? How are we going to
Mm.
stop and address that? What are we going to do to encounter that? How are we going to treat each other in that moment? Like, you plan it out beforehand, so that both people feel really safe. And the reason why she has that at the end of the book is because and this is what I do with couples too. If couples come to me and they're in conflict about something else, then that has to be resolved first, because the way that you talk about it is important. You're not going to feel comfortable having a conversation about sex unless the way that you talk about who does the dishes feels harmonious, you know?
Mm.
And if the way you talk about who does the dishes feels harmonious, then you feel more safe to talk about, how do we address if I'm going to feel pain with penetration today? What do we do about that? What do we do? Um, is it lube? Is it emotional connection? Is it that we relax into it? Do I need a massage? Do we
Mm.
need to move on to a different activity? Um, you know, um, what else could you do to give me pleasure in that moment that would be satisfying? Like, you're not really going to be able to have that conversation if you can't talk about an argument that you had over who picks up the kids from school in a way that is harmonious, you know?
Yeah.
So, because as you said, talking about sex is just more vulnerable.
And I think it's if you think about it rationally or loosely, then it's very, very natural that our tastes and desires would change over the course of 10, 20, 30 years. When I think about the foods I used to like when I was 20. I probably wouldn't welcome on the plate now. But the foods I like now are very, very different. And I think that's the same thing. So the things that I enjoyed when I was 20 were just Well, first of all, just having sex when I was 20 was amazing. I'm like, oh, I'm having sex. This is fabulous. I didn't really think about what it was or what I was enjoying. I was just the fact that I was having sex was a great thing. And
Right.
with food, I can have fast food. I've left home. I can eat whatever I want. I can eat out. I can do whatever I want to. Whereas now, because hopefully my palate's slightly more refined, sexually and from a food perspective, my thoughts and needs have changed. And I think it's a little bit like the example you said about somebody coming to you and saying, "Oh, my husband's on the phone to his mum all the time. He doesn't spend enough time with me. It's not really. I can't bear it." What she's really saying is actually, what I really like is a close relationship with you. I'm not affected by what happens with your mum at all. It's what I want from you. And the same with sex. You're not saying that it's something you don't want from the partner. It's, well, this is what I'm looking for now. It's what I want, as opposed to critiquing. It's a case of being vulnerable and being open about what you're looking for. And I think that's the balance of it, isn't it? And I think food's a good analogy about how our sort of tastes change and our desire for certain foods and our willingness to spend money or go to certain restaurants or travel for different food experiences, whatever. We've all had amazing meals out, and it's different than it was when I was 20.
Mm-hmm.
Only being able to afford fast food or ramen noodles or whatever. It's different.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And I think sexual desire is the hardest thing to talk about changing, just because people have a hard time talking about sex to begin with. But
Yeah.
I think you bring up a good point, is that we're always changing, and we can't assume that we or the person we're with are the same as we were even yesterday. But certainly that's easier to see over the decades. And what John Gottman's research showed the most, that is the difference between couples that do stay together for the long term, 40 plus years, versus ones that don't,
Mhm.
is that because all people change, and all couples have unsolvable issues. So what matters more than anything else is that when you change, that you make enough time to check in about the changes, that you have your finger on the pulse of what's important to both of you, that you're noticing the changes. That's the secure base piece, um, and the attunement piece. But that also that you talk about it together in a way where you feel like you're on the same team. You're
Yeah.
not criticizing the changes. You're being curious about the changes, and you're being curious in a way where you're like, hey, I noticed that you're spending more time on this and less time on that. And I want you to have what works for you. And I want to make sure it can still work for me. Can we talk about it? That we're talking about it in a way where he feels like I'm on his team, even though I'm talking about my issues with his changes, you know? Um, so that's what makes the biggest difference, is that we can talk about these issues and we can talk about the changes in a way that's respectful. Because I think a lot of times people get scared by
Mm.
change. And then the way they talk about it comes from fear, and that's understandable, but it depends on whether we know how to stay regulated and to regulate our own nervous systems to the point where we don't feel like fear puts us into survival mode. Because if fear puts us into survival mode, then we're in fight or flight. And
Yeah.
if we're in fight or flight, then think about what that means. We're either going to attack and criticize, or we're going to escape and push it under the rug and pretend like it doesn't matter and not deal with it, such that we wait until the change is really big to start talking about it, and then we're really freaking out and complaining, kind of like you're saying, like we don't talk about sex and then it comes out sideways.
And
So
and I think I cannot imagine going back into the sort of dating world now and having to sort of start afresh at my age. But couples do break up after sort of 20 or 30-year relationships and then obviously would like to find another partner. So when somebody comes to you and says that, so my partner and I have divorced, we've broken up, I haven't been with anybody for a year, I'm just scared of being with somebody new. So my husband and I, or my wife and I, we never talked about sex. It just petered out and it became something that was less important. But I've met this new person and we haven't been into me yet. And how do you, oh my goodness, how do you help somebody in that situation to recognize that they can still have a fulfilling feelings of intimacy with somebody new after being with somebody for such a long period of time?
yeah. I mean, there's kind of two questions in that I'm hearing. I mean, first of all, when people consider breaking up after 30 years, I think a lot of times it's because they don't know how to create a deep connection anymore, because the
Yeah.
ways they used to connect aren't there. And so I always encourage people to try to see what they can build with the person they're with first, because wherever you go, there you are. So if the reason why you're breaking up with the person that you're with now is because you don't have a connection, you're not necessarily going to know how to build it with a new person either. If it just sort of occurred to you as it just happened the first time,
Yeah.
um, it doesn't actually just happen. You got lucky.
Yeah.
um, but we need to know how to create a deep connection. And if we can do that with the person we're with, then maybe it'll work out with the person we're with. If we don't know how to do it with the person we're with, we won't know how to do it with a new person.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, is like, I always,
Mhm.
but I don't, when I work with couples, I don't have the agenda of keeping them together. I mean, obviously that's best, for many reasons, objectively,
Mhm.
but this isn't objective, it's subjective. And I'm always looking at the two people in front of me and what's best for both of them. And sometimes what's best for both of them is to break up because they don't share values, because they don't have the same desires. Like I said in the beginning, the reason why my ex-husband and I broke up is because when we really got down to it, once we knew how to attend to each other's feelings and transform conflict into intimacy and have this deep emotional connection, we realized that we wanted different things out of marriage. I could talk about it, but it would take a while. But so my point is that sometimes that's true. And if that's true, then of course I help couples break up in a conscious way, in an honoring way.
Mhm.
So then if the person that we're talking about is divorced after 30 years and looking to connect with someone new, um, in my opinion, there's just some steps that are important to take in that transition. That I look at grieving as not just feeling the feelings, but when we leave one relationship, we're always going to have to grieve. But sometimes that's done over the course of years. Sometimes by the time you break up, you've already grieved. You've already felt the grief. You've already created that emotional distance. Um, and so, but feeling the feelings is the first part, is just
Mhm.
letting the sadness flow and allowing yourself to create that emotional distance so that you're
Mhm.
ready to connect with someone new. But grieving is also asking yourself a series of questions for learning and growth. Um, and so I have my clients look at, first of all, really appreciating the wonderful moments, because that could be part of the grieving, that can bring up more grief. And then clarifying what doesn't work. There's something that isn't working that's causing you to break up. And of that, what's the other person's responsibility and what's your responsibility? Meaning, did you miss red flags? Did you compromise your boundaries when you shouldn't have? Um, did you not talk about something that was important to talk about that then, caused a problem later? And what is your responsibility? Um, what's the impact of that choice? Not to blame you, but what's your plan to learn how to do those skills better in the future?
Yeah.
Because unless you learn and grow, you're probably going to repeat the same mistake again. So it's learning how to have boundaries, learning how to talk about things that are important, learning how to see the red flags. Um, and then I look at, like, what are your goals and dreams now that are different than they might have been when you met this person? Like, we really need to reevaluate, sort of like you said, sexual desires change, all of our desires change, food desires change,
Yeah.
changes in our values happen as we get older, changes in our priorities happen, changes in our vision happen, changes in the legacy we want to leave the world happen. All that is important to share with a partner. What can we create together that we couldn't create on our own? We probably need to be more intentional about it now, because maybe the reason to get together with somebody in our 20s was to start a family, but maybe we're breaking up after the kids are out of the house and we're not looking to start another family. So what's the purpose of being together? What are
Yeah.
we creating together that we can't just create on our own? And then how would I talk to that, about that with my potential partner, to find out if they want the same thing? What are
Mm.
the communication skills that I need to build in order to do that? And then also, what experiences do I want to enjoy, and am I available for that, right? Like sort of like that maybe they're breaking up and they weren't satisfied with their sex life and they want to be exploring that with a new partner, but they're not even sure what they want anymore. And so how do I help them explore it themselves so
Mm.
that then when they're ready for that, obviously not in the beginning of a new relationship, but when they are ready for that, that they know how to experiment with somebody new. To, you know, they might be scared of experimenting with someone new, and how can I help somebody prepare for that? You know, to explore all the possibilities and the safety protocols that they would have to put in place, and then the discussions that they would have to have with somebody about that, because maybe it's been 30 years since they've talked about that. So I help them prepare for those conversations, you know. So I think there's a lot of factors involved with starting a new relationship after being in one for a long time. And uh,
Mm.
it's actually an honor for me when I do work with those clients to help them with that process, because there's even a lot of blind spots that they don't know that they need, and you know, then I can
Yeah.
help them identify this.
Do you think, and maybe it's impossible to answer, do you think we are, as humans, supposed to be monogamous? Or is it a societal construct that we've adhered to?
Yeah, that is such a good question. First of all, I think monogamy is necessary for most people.
Hmm.
Now, you know, so it's kind of like a necessary for fulfillment,
Yeah.
and to feel emotionally safe and physically safe. Um, and to really have love, because you need safety in order for love to blossom and thrive. And so the question of whether it's natural or societally based is a little bit irrelevant, because
Yeah.
we live in a society in which we don't have a lot of support from outside circumstance, from outside, like the support systems of our society are breaking down. And so we need more support from our partners than ever before. And also that we didn't grow up in a vacuum. Most of us nowadays, I would argue, have an insecure attachment style because we didn't get enough emotional attunement from our caretakers.
Mhm.
And so if we have anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, well, avoidant attachment people are the ones who most often seek open relationships, but that might not be what they need. Or might, you know, I don't judge. In fact, I mean, I, to answer your question partially, like I do coach people that have open relationships or polyamorous
Mhm.
relationships. And I actually recently interviewed Jessica Fern for my podcast, who's the author of Polysecure and Polywise. And I actually think her books are the best manual,
Yeah.
for that kind of relationship and that kind of exploration, that how to really build secure attachment even with polyamory, and deepen it and make sure that everybody's needs are getting met and that everybody feels safe. So I highly recommend her books. And when I coach people, I use a paradigm that's very much, you know, similar to hers. Um, but I think that, if people seek out polyamory because their needs aren't getting met in their relationship, then that's going to fail,
Yes.
because polyamory really only works successfully if you already have the skills to have a monogamous relationship with the, and build secure attachment with, somebody else, and you both want polyamory just so that you can spread your love to more people and you can include more people in your love, and you know that like you get to experience different parts of yourself with that person and it's consensual. It
Mm.
doesn't threaten the safety that you've built with the primary partner. And I think that's just very rare. And I think
Mm.
that in order for, somebody to be able to successfully navigate polyamory, they need to have all the skills to successfully navigate secure attachment and to be happy with one person. And usually, the reason people seek polyamory in our modern day culture is because their needs aren't getting met from one person. And so, therefore, they want to open it up so their needs are getting met from more than one person. But if that's not done in an extremely intentional way, it just creates more jealousy and more problems. um,
Yeah.
so to answer your question, I don't know what's natural. Like, you know, I haven't actually read that book, Sex at Dawn. But the author's theory, which I've heard and I think it's plausible, is that when we were living in tribes before the advent of agriculture, which like indigenous tribes nowadays have different relationships with this. Some indigenous tribes actually still are polyamorous, some of them aren't, right? So it really, like, that's a totally interesting exploration. But the theory is that when we were evolving, like more than 10,000 years ago before agriculture, that everybody shared everything. There was no concept of property. So why wouldn't we be polyamorous? Why would we didn't have to care whose kids were whose. Everybody raised everybody's kids, you know? So
I totally believe that was the case, and I think that's where the notion "it takes a village to raise a child" came from.
right.
Literally, because you didn't necessarily know who was the father of a child, so you all raised it together.
But didn't
And
matter. But now it
yeah,
matters. And so it's like I don't feel like
I
we
think
can. Yeah.
once we decided that I own this piece of land, I own this cattle, I own then naturally it became to, well, I wrong word, but I own my partner, therefore that's mine. We don't share anymore. I think that's where it. Yeah, but I do think you're obviously completely right in that. I think when people are, yeah, my relationship's not going great. We should bring somebody else into it. That is never going to work. That
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah,
literally,
no,
it's,
that's
if you think
never gonna
things
work.
are, and when I've talked to people in the polyamorous community, even they will fully admit it's complicated.
It's
Because
extremely
are you
complicated.
saying that actually both of you can be with other partners, or one other partner, or and yeah, how do you decide who to spend holidays with? How do you decide financially what happens and things? So it is not. It's not like, great, let's have a threesome. It's it's as far removed from that as possible. Really, it is not a not straightforward solution, especially as we have constructed ownership today and what that all means, really. You've been
Yeah.
very generous with your time. I just, if there's two more questions, if that's okay.
I know, of course. And what I want to say is, like, I think the distinction is less because I don't think that most people ever really thought of owning, even though that's some people do. And I think, that's another issue. But I don't think most people ever really thought of owning their partner. But it was more like monogamy from a safety standpoint had to be introduced with the advent of agriculture because we have to know who are our children to pass down our resources to them.
Hmm.
If we own property, we need to
Yes.
know who is our children to pass our property down to our children. So it's more like that level of ownership. I don't necessarily think that people think they own their partner. I don't, I mean, some people do, and that's a problem, of course. But it's more like that practical lens. And then, of course, with people with insecure attachment, I don't think that, which in my opinion, the majority of people have, that we don't feel safe opening up our relationship. We need to feel like the degree of emotional attunement. I love the way Stan Tatkin talks about it. He's a relationship therapist who I also really study a lot with, about how to build secure attachment. That he guides couples into create what he calls a couple bubble, where they make agreements that keep both of them feeling safe and that they learn how to prioritize each other's attachment needs in that. And so he says that human beings are so complicated that the reason why monogamy is really necessary for most people is, like, each of us has kind of an owner's manual of what we need to be happy. And it really takes, they're complicated. And it's like, if we're building secure attachment, that it's really about me learning your owner's manual and you learning my owner's manual, of the care and
Yeah.
feeding of this person. And it's like hard to do that with more than one person. It's really, really enough work to do that with one other person, let alone more. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
No, I do agree. I do agree. I think it's yeah. I'm sure it works for some people, but I think for the majority, it's yeah, something to be aware of, but maybe not to indulge in. So
Yeah,
my
but no
last
judgment.
two,
Like I do coach polyamory couples, and I actually feel really fulfilled doing that because I love complicated relationships. So anyway, it's fun for me.
so my two last questions. So the first one would be, if you could offer people that are listening maybe one daily practice that would move them closer to passion, intimacy, mutual support, what might that look like?
Mm-hmm. So is it for singles or couples?
Couples, I think.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think if you want that attuned daily practice, that you would start with each other's love languages.
Okay.
Because some, I'll list them off. Like there's quality time, there's physical touch, there's words of affirmation, there's gifts, and there's I don't know which one I missed. um, but oh gosh, oh, acts of service. That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
So if my partner's love language is acts of service, then what might
Mm-hmm.
be the biggest way to feel connected to him every day is for me to do the dishes every day. Then he'll feel really loved and will feel really connected. If it's quality time, then it's spending at least 30 minutes connecting about our days. That happens to be mine. So that's what I need in order to feel connected to him. Like that's the highest leverage thing that he can provide for me is I need at least 30 minutes of time to connect about our days. Um, but not everybody needs that. If it's gifts, then it might be that's not about necessarily material things, but it's about like I thought about you and
Yeah.
I thought about you, so I made you pancakes in the shape of hearts this morning because I know that you like hearts. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
so the thought that you're putting into whatever it is that you do for the person. Um, if it's touch, then maybe the highest leverage thing you could do to connect every day is make 5 minutes to give each other like a hand massage or a foot massage. Or do something like or rub their shoulders every day, to make them feel that you care. So, um, what I recommend is that couples learn each other's love language and ask each other, what's the highest leverage thing I could do for a few minutes a day to make you feel that I care?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I always recommend that couples connect about their day every day to feel connected. That's what we need for secure attachment. So I think that is the highest leverage. So I'm sort of torn because I think one of the most important things if you don't have time is to establish a ritual around leaving and coming back together, like that you always hug when you leave and come home or say hello or goodbye the first thing before you take your coat off or whatever. I think that's something that helps people to feel connected even if they don't have a minute of extra time. um, but if you do have a little bit of time, the question is, how can you ask each other deeper questions to connect on a daily level, like not
Mm-hmm.
just like what happened today because that's the first level, but like what was the most meaningful moment of your day, or you know what was the most exciting part of your day, or what were you struggling with today that you could use my support with. Like those kinds of deeper questions I think are really important to get to the heart of what would help us feel more connected.
Oh, that's really useful. Yeah, thank you. And then my last question. So we started off talking about the 16-year-old you. I wondered if you somehow had the ability to go back and say something to the 16-year-old Valerie as she was setting off on her life's journey. What would you say to her?
Love that question. I'm just closing my eyes so I can feel into the answer. um yeah, I was really codependent at 16. I was trying to be cool and make other people like me. Um, so I think I would tell her that what matters the most, rather than other people liking you, is that you are liking yourself and that you are feeling secure in yourself and that you're attending to your own feelings and needs. And I would teach her how to attend to her own feelings and needs and feel more secure, so that she would then look at, instead of trying to make other people like her, like, who do I like and who do I want to get closer to and how can I just be myself with them? How can I be curious about them and get to know them? um, and I think if I had those skills as a teenager, then I would have just not carried so much tension in my body. I wouldn't have developed digestive issues in high school. I would have felt like I probably would have chose a more attuned and aligned major for myself in college that had anything to do with my career now, I would have had a lot easier time discovering what it is that I wanted out of life, because I wound up, to paraphrase Gen Z's terminology now, screwing around and finding out a lot of stuff that like I didn't have to have such a wind around path to. I could have discovered. But I honestly think I would have wound up in the same place, helping
Yeah, it's
people
just a
in
journey to get
their
there, isn't it? I suppose.
relationships. But I would have probably had an easier journey to get here.
Yeah, I guess everything we go through creates the person we end up being, doesn't it? So if you don't do one thing, if you never married your first husband, or if I never moved from home to London, or all these things are just all the knock-on implications of that. I think, well, what person would I become if I'd followed that different path? So hopefully we will find the way we're supposed to in the end. But sometimes it'd be nice if the journey there was a little bit a little bit easier.
I know. I was just talking about that with a girlfriend yesterday, where she was like, I wish that I could go back and redo experiences I had in the past with the knowledge I have now. And I'm like, yeah, you and everyone else on the planet.
Yeah, that's my biggest thing. If
I
I could
mean,
go
I
back
said it,
to
I hope
18
in
and know what I know now, but yeah.
I said it, I hope in a nicer way than that. But but yeah, no, I mean, it's the experiences that we have give us the learning experiences that we need, and the developmental experiences that we have to build character for who we are today. So
Yeah,
I do fully believe that. But it would be nice if I can go back and have the
do it.
skills I have now emotionally as a
Mm.
teenager. Then I probably would have become a therapist instead of a coach in that case.
Mhm.
But I mean, I no regrets. Like, I really love the fact that I can coach people all over the world, and that I have a very solution focused approach. And there's, of course, solution focused therapy too. Like I said, I would probably be doing the same thing, right?
Yeah. Mm. Thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time and for doing this. And yeah, it was a real pleasure to talk to you again. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Likewise.